So, Lenny Kravitz, listen, do we love some Lenny Kravitz? I think we do. I think that Lenny is generally someone that we think of and have warm feelings about. Some people have had jokes at various times, patchouli jokes and things of that nature. Comedy about he and Lisa Bonet's and what is it, Jason Momoa? But I don't even think Jason's a part of the mix anymore. But they're how they basically connected and co-parented and had a blended family situation for all of those years. So Lenny has a new album coming out, and it is called. I just lost it. It is called Blue Electric Light, and it's his first album that he's dropping in 5 years. So he recently did an interview with Esquire where he opened up about a lot of things, right? And one of the things that has caught a lot of people's eye is that the 59-year-old said that he has been mystified at how he's been treated by black entertainment and culture outlets through the years. He said, take Vibe magazine, which featured a who's who of black artists in its pages when it began publishing in 1993. They waited almost a decade to put Lenny on the cover. And he said it wasn't just Vibe. To this day, he says, I have not been invited to a BET thing or a Source Awards thing, he says. And it's like, here is a black artist who has reintroduced many um, to black art forms because we know rock and roll was started by black people. He's broken down barriers just like those that came before me broke down. That is a positive, and they don't have anything to say about it. So I thought that this was interesting because he is right to a degree. Lenny is not someone generally that probably a BET or Source Awards would think to reach out to. Maybe a desire to, but I don't know if he would necessarily be top of mind. As I mentioned, right? I worked at Virgin Records and I worked on a Lenny project or two. He's a great guy, really cool. Enjoyed that. And I also worked at BET. So I have a unique perspective in that I can see this topic from both sides. Now, I can't really say what is currently happening as far as Lenny and his career and whomever's around him. But what I absolutely can say is that if in 2002, 2001, at that time frame, if someone from BET had reached out to Virgin Records PR department, or I can't say this part with absolute certainty, reached out to Lenny's management, they probably would have been turned away or ignored because they didn't think that it was a fit. I find it interesting that Lenny is not aware that part of the reason why he wasn't in black spaces, at least some of the time, is because those around him weren't really open to him being featured in those. They didn't. Let me say this. I mean, and I think this is obvious and we still see it now. There are different tier levels we know for celebrities, of course, but they also put different tier levels as far as outlets that they engage in. Fahima mentions that Lenny has done collaborations with hip hop artists. That's fine. It's not saying, I'm not trying to imply that Lenny doesn't like black culture or things like that. But what I am saying is sometimes the people around you will gatekeep what you have access to as an artist. Sometimes it is on you to step into that, right? Like, for example, you hear a lot of times about things happening on the red carpet and black outlets being placed at the end of the carpet and talent walking by, you ask their publicist, can they stop? And they're like, oh, we don't have time, or they'll come so late so that really they can only hit the big outlets and move ahead. Sometimes that's their publicist, and sometimes that is the talent hiding behind their publicist. So, I mean, again, I love Lenny. I worked on some Lenny projects. That's a fact. I enjoy his music. I've seen his shows. He puts on a fantastic show. But again, I can't say what is happening in 2023. But what I can tell you is in that the early 2000s, if a BET or a Soul Train Awards potentially reached out to Lenny, I don't know if his team would have accepted, right? I also think that there is a perception around Lenny, whether real or assumed, that he is not someone that really digs into culture in the same way that we think of when we think of something like BET. So there was an interview that he did, I believe, for the OWN network that took place in 2013, right? And some of his comments that he said in there, and let me be clear, I don't necessarily think that there is something wrong with his perspective, but it's just a perspective that I know that some people would say, oh, well, he probably doesn't have an interest in getting into something that is, very black or very steeped in what we deem black culture, that with all of its current elements, so to speak, right? So in 2013, he spoke about not seeing race being a big deal and not really seeing a difference about races because his parents weren't the same race. They didn't discuss it. And he said because everyone around him was different colors, religions, and backgrounds, it wasn't something that was a big deal to him. And I use the word colors because he did. I took that as a direct quote. He also mentioned in this interview that the first day of first grade, a kid ran up to him and yelled, "Your father's white." And that was the first time he ever thought about there was a difference in his family, right? He went on to explain in this interview from 2013 that his great grandmother was Cherokee Indian, his father a Russian Jew, and his mother was Bohemian. So he didn't know what to mark on race forms. He said teachers would automatically just mark him as black, and he didn't like it, and he felt like it squashed his heritage. And so I think that when some people hear statements like that, it very much hits in the same way for some that someone saying all lives matter does. And I think with those type of things, people don't know what to make of it. So the assumption is someone like Lenny may not want to celebrate into the culture like that. And two, were his people, if they were pitched for Lenny, would they, one, bring that to him, and two, allow him to go to that? Trust and believe. There are a lot of artists at times that I can say BET sought after for the awards or things of that nature that wouldn't come. We talk about it now. We just talked about it in June, how sometimes some of the bigger artists in the culture will show up at other things, but not necessarily show up at things like the BET Awards or the Soul Train Awards. Because when, for some, not all, for some, when the movement happens towards mainstream success, then sometimes our things seem smaller or less significant. And they move as such and they treat us as such. But let something go wrong, let something happen, they're right there at our door, like brother, sister, whatever. So I'm not implying that that is anything that was going on with Lenny. I just find it interesting, though, that I'm sure he wanted to, everyone wants to feel loved and accepted from their own. And maybe this is a thought that has developed over time as he's evolved as a person, as an artist, and, on that level, because I just think it was interesting. He's never really made an effort when he's done promo at radio. I know it's probably was hard or interesting to try and get radio play at, a hip hop station or a regular R&B station for some of his music, but did he ever think about maybe just going to the station and doing an interview anyway? Even if it might not go to an ad at that time. Again, I love Lenny, but sometimes we just like people that we feel show up for us too. And I think the word, whether real, implied, or assumed, is that Lenny had no interest in getting into black culture in that way. At any rate, we'll see what happens now that he has spoken out about it. Maybe we'll see him at the BET Awards next June. I would like to see Lenny honored, you know. Um, he really is an important part of the culture if you think about it. His mom, Roxy Roker, what she did with the Jeffersons, what he did as an artist. Shout out to View Park because Lenny lived in View Park for a little while. Got to get my LA stuff in. But I think it's interesting that he's taken this stance, sort of. When he was Romeo Blue as well, I don't recall him really being into that. Again, not saying that he wasn't, it just wasn't something that he led with.